I want to introduce you to a guy I've known since CNN.
Yeah, you were interviewing me and getting to know me before it was fashionable.
Is it fashionable yet?
Yeah, you know, we had a rally against terrorism in 2004 in Phoenix, and a couple years later, you brought me onto the national stage. It was my first national interview.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Zudi Jasser is the president of the Islamic Forum for Democracy, and you're going to see him tonight. And I have to tell you, Zudi, I watched the episode a couple of nights ago, and you've seen it?
Yes.
And for the first time, I mean, I've seen you now everywhere, but for the first time, I really had a sense of how deeply important your work is and how brave it is of you to do this. It's not popular. What is your life like, standing up and saying, you're one of the Martin Luthers of Islam. Would you, I know that's a pretty heavy title to hang around your neck, but wouldn't you say? I mean, that's kind of what you're doing.
Well, I think what I'm doing is intrinsically American, whether it's Thomas Paine or Jefferson, that we're all about a personal relationship with God against theocrats. And, you know, this I feel as an obligation for protecting our country and letting Americans know that Muslims are not only at the head of the spear, need to be, and we need some fire under our feet to wake up. And I do this for my kids. You know, what is our legacy? What are we going to leave behind? A world that has a religion that's a quarter of the world's population, that's dominated by a mafia right now, that is all about beheading and laws in the 13th century?
What's it going to take? Last night I had Frank Gaffney here, and we were talking, and he said, you know, Muslims have to play a big role in it, blah, blah, blah. We've heard that a million times, but honestly, Zudi, what's it going to take when they're crucifying not just Christians and Jews, Muslims? So they're crucifying people.
Well,
what's it going to take for people to wake up?
The problem is that in America, we have it so easy, we don't have enough at stake. And yet if we put too much at stake and we alienate Muslims, they're not going to be, you know, we're not going to have the right strategy. So we have to thread that needle. Muslims in Egypt and Tunisia had enough at stake that they went to the street in the millions to reject the Brotherhood. There was a Green Revolution in Iran that wanted to reject the theocrats, and we abandoned them. In America, because we're so protected by a government that gives us freedom and liberty to practice faith as we wish, Muslims really don't feel like we have enough at stake to wake up, and that's the problem. And you know, what's the difference between myself that puts not only my life, my family, and other things at stake for this is, I don't know, I guess I was in the Navy. I felt like I have to give back. You know, I care about legacy as you do. We have to put more at stake for Muslims. And our military, our media, our government have to realize that we need a strategy. We don't have a strategy against the jihad right now.
We won't even admit the truth. Let me ask you a couple of questions. One, do you know who Grover Norquist is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good guy, bad guy?
If you're about taxation, good guy. But if you're about Islamism and strategy for domestic and global security, I think he's asleep and is working in the past, has been apologetic towards these countries, Saudi Arabia and others, that are, I think, fueling. I mean, when you say why moderate voices can't speak up, when you have foundations in the tens of the millions, like the Clinton Foundation, that accepts foreign donations, and President Clinton says, oh, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. I'm proud of the fact that our organization doesn't take foreign money, because that would make me beholden to the mafia that is suppressing free speech for reform in Islam. People like Grover, the Clinton Foundation, and others that sort of say, well, the Islamists, we won't use even that term. It obstructs me, it prevents reform, and the Islamists dominate the narrative.
Okay, why does it obstruct you? So Bill Clinton and the Clinton Foundation, Hillary Clinton taking all that money, and she said, everybody knows there's nobody that loves, you know, or stands for women's rights more than me. Why is that a lie?
Because if there's no problem in Islam or Islamism, it's just about violent extremism, as the government wants to call it, I don't have any relevance. You might as well talk to Buddhists and Christians and atheists about the problem, because it's all about whack-a-mole for the terrorists. If it's about Islamic reform, then you have to bring to the table Muslims, and that's the cognitive dissonance. The president at his White House, you know, shindig a couple weeks ago said, oh, we have Muslims here because we need them to help us, and yet it's not about Islam. So why were you calling in Muslims? So this is the issue. Al Jazeera outlaws the use of the term Islamist because they realize if we defeat political Islam and the concept of all Islamic states, the Qatari government, which funds Al Jazeera, the Saudis, will lose power to the people and free movements.
I don't know why this is different than World War II, where we said we were going to go defeat the Nazis. Not the Germans, the Nazis.
And not blitzkrieg, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
we weren't going to fight the tactic.
Right.
We were
right.
fighting the ideology.
Correct. And we didn't seem to have a problem when the war was over embracing the Germans as long as you weren't a Nazi. You know what I mean? But for some reason, this White House, and I think, and I want to ask you this, I think the way we, and Bush did it too, the way we coddle and the way we treat this blurs the lines so much that people like you are in danger if things get really bad, because you won't know who the good guys and bad guys are.
It's so insulting. They're racializing, or I call it the Al Sharptonization of Islam, that somehow it's a race, but it's an ideology. And it infantilizes us, that somehow we're not grown up enough to deal with it. The millions in Egypt were grown up enough to push back against the Brotherhood. And I can tell you that one of the reasons I do this is I fear there are major movements in the West, in Europe, patriotic, so-called patriotic movements that want to cleanse the West of this Islamic threat. Well, a quarter of the world are Muslim. It's not a cult. It's a religion of a quarter of the planet. So either they come forth through a reform like the West did, and we understand the time in history Islam is in, and we embrace and take sides within the House of Islam, or the world is headed towards a cataclysmic confrontation or a clash of civilizations, which I think we can prevent.
I don't.
Well, you know, revolutions happened, they were pretty bloody in the West. The 100 Years' War, 30 Years' War, these were very bloody events.
I just see that, you know, we are not as far down the road as Europe is. Europe is so far down the rabbit hole of lying to themselves that you have these neo-Nazi groups coming to rise, and they are terrifying, Zudi.
But the difference, Glenn, is that America's first freedom was religious freedom. So, you know, in my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, I had to do this because America has the only antidote to inoculate Muslim populations against political Islam, which is a country that celebrates your faith under God, but not under a faith, not under Islam or under Christianity. It's under God. That formula is the only antidote for the Egyptians, the Tunisians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, and others. If they continue to operate under the Islamic State or Islamo-patriotic movement, it will continue to fuel radical Islam for generations to come.
Okay, so the new guy in Egypt who has closed down 27,000 mosques.
Not a
good guy.
No, because he identifies the problem again, which is this violent, militant Islam that he wants to sort of go away, but yet he doesn't use words like liberty and freedom and democracy. He doesn't show a strategic, trajectory.
May I ask, with it this far gone, and this is what I'm afraid of again, and I think this is what you're afraid of too. Once there's fear, and once there's a real enemy that can actually do something and it's embedded in living with you, it becomes this cancer and the people cry out for a strong man. I personally think everybody is the same. I personally think everybody just wants to live harmoniously, just leave me alone, let me have a good job. They don't want strongmen. They do want somebody to clean up the garbage, clean up the trash of people on the streets that are, and in cases in like Egypt, can you live without a strong man with the way that Islamism has grown so deep and dark?
Not in 5 years, but in 20 years, yes. You have 24/7 media, YouTube, Twitter, education that will allow them to bring information in. Said Ibrahim, a reformer right after Mubarak left, said, please, no elections for 4 years. They had him in 6 to 12 months, and the Brotherhood, surprise, surprise,
won.
What
did you think of Benjamin Netanyahu's trip?
I think his speech did more to educate the West about the threat than I've heard in years in speeches in Congress.
What do you think of us negotiating with Iran?
you can't negotiate with people who believe the end of times will come, you know, that fund Hezbollah, and a nuclear bomb in the arms of a country of Khomeinis is basically like Hezbollah with a suicide operation to bring in the 12th Imam. So they only come to the table when they have to, not when they want to. And that's why you do that through strength, not through appeasement. And I can tell you, this is it's tribalism 101. It's the mafia of militant Islamist leaders. You know how to deal with them through strength. Netanyahu and his country, Israel, have been dealing with this for decades and understand it. Unfortunately, President Obama looks at the world through a post-American lens, and that vacuum in the Middle East, in a post-American way, is getting filled by the most evil. I call it a Darwin doctrine in the Middle East, where you have Russia, Syria, Assad, Iran filling in those vacuums in the absence of the American promotion of liberty. We need a liberty doctrine, and hopefully the next president will bring that.
Okay, when we come back, I want to introduce you to another guest, and Zudi's going to stay with, but I want to bring in a woman. She was in Iran before it fell, and she has seen executions firsthand. She is obviously a woman who knows what all of this means for women. And I don't know why the women of America, we care so much about stupid birth control. How about real women's rights? The right to be a human being, a fully counted human being in much of the world. She's going to join us next.